Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comment section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Aileen Carol Pittman was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Her mother, Diane, was only 16 years old at the time. Her father, Leo Pittman, was not part of her life. Before Aileen was born, her parents divorced. Aileen never met her father. Later, she learned he was sent to prison for serious crimes and died by suicide there. When Aileen was almost 4 years old, her mother left her and her older brother, Keith. The children went to live with their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wernos. The grandparents legally adopted the children. Both grandparents drank alcohol heavily. Aileen said her grandfather was violent and sexually abusive toward her when she was a child. By the time she was 11 years old, she began exchanging sexual acts with other children at school for cigarettes, food, or drugs. She also said she had sexual contact with her brother during this time. When Aileen was 14 years old, she became pregnant. She said the pregnancy was the result of a rape by an older man who was a friend of her grandfather. She was sent to a home for unmarried mothers. She gave birth to a baby boy in March 1971. Her grandfather forced her to give the baby up for adoption immediately afterward. Soon after having the baby, Aileen dropped out of school. Around this same time, her grandmother died from liver failure, which was related to her drinking. When Aileen was 15, her grandfather told her to leave the house and not come back. She had no place to live, so she began sleeping in the woods near her old home. To get money for food and shelter, she started working as a prostitute. This meant she would have sex with men for money. At age 18, Aileen was arrested for the first time. She was drunk while driving, behaved in a disorderly way, and shot a gun from a moving car. In 1976, when she was 20, she hitchhiked to Florida. There, she met a 69-year-old man named Louis Fell. They got married very quickly. The marriage was announced in the local newspaper. However, Aileen often got into fights at bars. She also hit her husband with his cane. Within weeks, her husband got a legal order to keep her away from him. The marriage was legally ended after only 9 weeks. Aileen returned to Michigan. In July 1976, her brother Keith died of cancer. Aileen received $10,000 from his life insurance. She spent all the money quickly on things like a new car, which she soon crashed. By 1978, when she was 22, Aileen tried to end her own life by shooting herself in the stomach. Between the ages of 14 and 22, she had tried to kill herself 6 times. Over the next several years, Aileen was arrested for other crimes. These included armed robbery of a store, forging checks, and stealing a car. She served some time in prison. In 1986, when she was 30 years old, she met a 24-year-old woman named Tyria Moore at a bar in Daytona Beach, Florida. They began a romantic relationship. They moved in together. Aileen supported them both by continuing to work as a prostitute along Florida highways. Aileen Wernos continued her life with Tyria Moore in Florida. She earned money by working as a prostitute. She would stand along highways, and when a man driving alone stopped, she would agree to have sex with him for cash. This was how she paid for their motel rooms, food, and other needs. Her first killing happened on November 30th, 1989. She was picked up by a 51-year-old man named Richard Mallory, who owned an electronics store. They drove to a secluded, wooded area. Wernos later claimed that Mallory beat and raped her. During this violent encounter, she pulled out a .22 caliber pistol that she carried. She shot and killed Richard Mallory. After he was dead, she took his money and personal belongings. She then drove his car to another location, abandoned it, and left his body in the woods. She returned to Moore. 2 days later, a police deputy found Mallory's abandoned car. His body was discovered 2 weeks after the killing. He had been shot several times. Wuornos did not kill again for several months. She continued working as a prostitute. Then, on May 19, 1990, she was picked up by a 47-year-old construction worker named David Spears. She again directed him to a remote area. She shot him multiple times with her .22 caliber pistol. She took his money and belongings. She left his body, which was found on June 1st. 12 days later, on May 31st, she killed a 40-year-old man named Charles Carskadden. He was a part-time rodeo worker. She shot him 9 times. She wrapped his body in an electric blanket from his own car. She then took his car and used it for several days. She also took a gun that belonged to him and later sold it at a pawn shop. His body was found on June 6th. In early June 1990, a 65-year-old retired merchant seaman named Peter Seams gave her a ride. She shot him inside his car. His body was never found. She and Tyria Moore then began driving across Florida in Seams' car. On July 4th, 1990, while Moore was driving, they crashed the car into a ditch in a place called Orange Springs. 2 women were seen running from the crash. A witness got a good look at them. Wuornos left her fingerprint on the inside door handle of the abandoned car. The police were called to the crash scene. They now had a description of 2 women connected to a missing man's car. Wuornos resumed killing soon after. On July 31st, she was picked up by Troy Burress, a 50-year-old sausage salesman. She shot him twice and took his money and truck. His body was found on August 4th. On September 11th, she killed Charles Humphreys, a 56-year-old retired police chief and Air Force major. He was shot 7 times. His body was found the next day. Her final murder was on November 19, 1990. The victim was Walter Antonio, a 61-year-old trucker and reserve police officer. She shot him 4 times on a remote logging road. His body was found later that day. During this time, Wuornos needed money. She began taking items from the men she killed, things like cameras, tools, rings, and credit cards. She would sell these items at different pawn shops across Florida. She had to sign pawn shop tickets with her name or an alias to complete these sales. At one pawn shop, she used her real first name, Aileen, on the receipt. The police, investigating the abandoned car from the July 4th crash, had a description of 2 women. They also began finding the possessions of the murdered men in various pawn shops. They collected the pawn tickets. On one ticket, they found a fingerprint. They did not know who it belonged to yet. The police investigating the series of murdered men had 2 key pieces of evidence from the separate cases. They had a fingerprint from a pawn shop ticket, and they had a fingerprint from inside Peter Seams's abandoned car. They ran these fingerprints through their automated database. The prints matched a person with a criminal record in Florida, Aileen Wuornos. Once they had a name, they showed her photograph to the witness who had seen the 2 women flee the crashed car. The witness confirmed Wuornos was one of those women. On January 9, 1991, police located Wuornos at a biker bar called The Last Resort. They arrested her on an existing warrant for a minor charge of having a hidden weapon. This allowed them to take her into custody while they built their murder case. The next day, police found her partner, Tyria Moore, living in Pennsylvania. Detectives spoke with Moore. They told her they knew she was with Wuornos during some of the incidents and that she could be charged as an accessory to murder. Moore agreed to help the police in exchange for a promise that she would not be prosecuted. Moore returned to Florida with the police. She was placed in a motel room. Under the direction of detectives, she made phone calls to Wuornos, who was now in jail. Moore acted scared and told Wuornos she was worried the police would arrest her too. She repeatedly asked Wuornos to tell the truth about what happened to clear her name. After several days of these calls, Wuornos agreed to confess to protect more. On January 16, 1991, Wuornos gave a detailed confession to the police. She said she killed 7 men. Her first story was that each man had raped or tried to rape her while she was working as a prostitute, and she killed them in self-defense. The police investigated her claims. They found that her first victim, Richard Mallory, did have a past criminal record for a sexual assault. However, for the other 6 victims, there was no evidence or history to suggest they were violent. The state of Florida decided to try Wuornos for the murder of Richard Mallory first. Her trial began in January 1992. In court, Wuornos changed her story. She said Mallory had raped her, but she admitted the other men had not. The prosecution presented physical evidence, including the pawned items that belonged to the victims. Tyria Moore testified for the prosecution, telling the jury what Wuornos had told her about the killings. The jury did not believe the self-defense claim for the Mallory murder. They found Wuornos guilty of first-degree murder. After the guilty verdict, the same jury had to decide if she should get the death penalty. Defense lawyers had psychiatrists examine Wuornos. The psychiatrists said she had severe personality disorders linked to her traumatic childhood. The jury still recommended the death sentence, and the judge agreed. Wuornos was sentenced to death for the murder of Richard Mallory. Instead of going through more trials, Wuornos then pleaded no contest or guilty to the murders of 6 other men. She said she wanted to get right with God and avoid more court proceedings. In court, she admitted she robbed the men and killed them so there would be no witnesses. Judges held separate hearings for these pleas and sentenced her to death for each murder. In total, she received 6 death sentences. Wuornos was sent to death row at the Broward Correctional Institution. For the next 10 years, she filed appeals to try to stop her execution. Then in 2001, she fired her lawyers and asked the courts to stop all appeals. She wrote that she was sane and wanted to be executed. She said she killed the men in cold blood and would kill again. A group of court-appointed doctors evaluated her and said she was mentally competent to make this decision to speed up her execution. On October 9, 2002, the state of Florida executed Aileen Wuornos by lethal injection. She declined a special last meal, drinking only a cup of coffee. She made a final statement about sailing with Jesus, and then was executed. Her body was cremated afterward. A childhood friend scattered her ashes in Michigan. Tyria Moore was not charged with any crime and disappeared from public view. The families of the 7 victims received no further justice beyond Wuornos's execution. The story of the highway prostitute who killed her clients became widely known through news reports, books, and later a film. Story 2. Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California. Her parents, Trudy and Jesse Gray, were both alcoholics. Her father was often violent and would threaten to kill himself in front of the children. He died from tuberculosis when Dorothea was 8 years old. Her mother worked as a prostitute and lost custody of her children the following year. Shortly after that, her mother died in a motorcycle accident. Dorothea and her siblings were sent to live in an orphanage. At the orphanage, Dorothea was sexually abused. When she was 16 years old, Dorothea married a soldier named Fred McFall. They had 2 daughters soon after the marriage. Dorothea did not keep the children. She sent one daughter to live with relatives and put the other one up for adoption. She also had a miscarriage during this time. In the spring of 1948, when she was 19, Dorothea was arrested for forging checks to buy clothes and accessories. She pleaded guilty and served 4 months in jail. After her release, she left the city. Her husband left her around this same time. In 1952, she met and married a merchant seaman named Axel Johansson in San Francisco. For this marriage, she invented a false identity. She told people she was a Muslim woman from Egypt and Israel named Taya Singoalan Ayarda. Her husband was often away at sea. While he was gone, Dorothea would invite other men to the house and gamble away his money. This marriage was very unstable. In 1960, she was arrested for using a bookkeeping business as a front for a brothel in Sacramento. She was found guilty and spent 90 days in jail. The next year, her husband had her placed in a state mental hospital. He did this because of her constant drinking, lying, criminal behavior, and threats to kill herself. Doctors at the hospital diagnosed her as a pathological liar with a very unstable personality. She and Johansson divorced in 1966, but she continued to use his last name. After the divorce, she changed her story. She now called herself Sharon Johansson and said she was a devoted Christian. She began to build a public image as a kind caregiver. She offered free shelter to young women who were poor or abused. In 1968, she married a man named Roberto Puente. They separated after 16 months. Dorothea said he was abusive. They did not finalize their divorce until 1973, but she kept the last name Puente for the rest of her life. Dorothea Puente then began to focus on running a boarding house in Sacramento. The boarding house was for people who had problems. She helped alcoholics, homeless people, and people with mental illness. She helped them get their Social Security benefit checks from the government. She worked hard to look like a respectable grandmother. She wore old-fashioned clothes and large glasses and let her hair go gray. She became a trusted figure in her community and donated to local charities. On December 21, 1978, Dorothea Puente was convicted of a crime related to this work. She was caught illegally cashing 34 government checks that belonged to the people living in her boarding house. The court gave her 5 years of probation and ordered her to pay back $4,000. After being released from prison in September 1985, Dorothea Puente returned to running her boarding house at 1426 F Street in Sacramento. Shortly after her release, a man named Everson Gillouth, who had written to her in prison, came to live at her house. He arrived with his truck and trailer. In October, Puente wrote to Gilmouth's sister, saying they would marry in November. A handyman working for Puente built a large wooden box for her. The day after it was finished, the box was nailed shut. Puente had the handyman help her move the very heavy box to a location near a river. In January 1986, a fisherman found the box. Inside was a badly decomposed body. Puente had been sending forged letters to Gilmouth's sister to make it seem he was still alive. She also forged his signature to sell his truck and kept cashing his benefit checks until July 1986. In the fall of 1986, an elderly woman named Betty Mae Palmer came to live at Puente's boarding house. In October, Puente got a California identification card with her own photo, but with Palmer's name on it. Soon after, she changed the address for Palmer's Social Security checks to come to her house. Puente then forged Palmer's signature on these checks and cashed them, taking about $7,000. Also in October 1986, Puente gained control over the finances of a tenant named Leona Carpenter. Carpenter was in the hospital after a drug overdose. Puente had a notary come to the hospital to make her Carpenter's power of attorney. 10 days later, Puente began cashing Carpenter's Social Security checks. When Carpenter was released from the hospital, she went to live with Puente. After returning to the hospital and being released again, Carpenter disappeared in February 1987. In February 1987, a man named James Gallup moved into the house. In July, a doctor found a tumor in Gallup's colon and wanted to do more tests. Puente later called the doctor's office and said Gallup had gone to Los Angeles and would not be returning. Gallup was not seen again. In July 1987, another tenant, Eugene Gamble, was found dead from a drug overdose. Puente told people it was a suicide. She was never charged for his death, but he was considered a possible victim. In October 1987, a woman named Vera Faye Martin was sent to live with Puente. Within days, Puente began forging and cashing Martin's Social Security checks. Martin failed to call her daughter on her birthday later that month, which was very unusual for her. She was not seen again. Later in October 1987, a woman named Dorothy Miller was placed in an upstairs room in Puente's house. Puente introduced Miller to a friend, who became the official payee for Miller's benefits. Miller disappeared only weeks after arriving. Puente hired a carpet cleaner to clean a large, foul-smelling stain in Miller's room. Puente continued to forge and cash Miller's checks after she was gone. In February 1988, a man named Benjamin Fink came to live at the house. His brother visited him every week for about 6 weeks. By the end of April, Fink was gone. Another tenant complained of a bad smell from his room, but Puente said it was a sewer problem. At the end of April, Puente bought 12 bags of cement. In June, a hole was dug next to a metal shed in the yard and then filled with concrete. Also in February 1988, a man named Alvaro Montoya arrived. In March, Puente applied to become the payee for his benefit checks. Montoya was last seen in late August. Puente told people he had gone to Mexico to visit family. Social workers trying to check on Montoya could not find him. In November, Puente had a former convict call a social worker, pretending to be Montoya's brother-in-law, to say Montoya had moved to Utah. The social worker became suspicious and told Puente she would call the police. Soon after, the social worker received a suspicious letter about Montoya. During this time, police began asking questions about Montoya's disappearance. On November 11, 1988, a detective came to Puente's boarding house. With her permission, he started digging in the backyard where the soil looked disturbed. Within 30 minutes, he found a human body buried there. Just hours after the first body was discovered in her yard on November 11, 1988, Dorothea Puente left her boarding house without telling the police. She was not officially in custody at that moment, and she used the opportunity to disappear. An all-points bulletin was issued for her arrest 2 days later. Meanwhile, the police continued to dig at her property. Over the next several days, they found 6 more bodies buried in the backyard and garden. The victims were identified as Betty Mae Palmer, Leona Carpenter, James Gallup, Vera Faye Martin, Dorothy Miller, and Benjamin Fink. Another body, that of Alvaro Montoya, was found buried beside Leona Carpenter. Puente was found in Los Angeles on November 16, 1988. A man in a bar recognized her from a television news report about the Sacramento bodies. He contacted a reporter, and together they notified the police. Puente was arrested at a motel where she was staying under a false name. She was flown back to Sacramento and formally charged with the murder of Alvaro Montoya. Later, the charges were expanded. On March 31, 1989, the district attorney filed an amended complaint. Puente was charged with 9 counts of first-degree murder. The victims named were Ruth Monroe, Everson Gilmouth, Betty Mae Palmer, James Gallup, Leona Carpenter, Vera Faye Martin, Dorothy Miller, Alvaro Montoya, and Benjamin Fink. The prosecution stated that the murder method was typically a drug overdose. They said Puente would give her tenants a combination of prescription pills and over-the-counter medicines until they died. She would then bury them on her property and continue to collect their Social Security checks. The physical evidence was strong. Forensic testing showed the presence of drugs like flurazepam, codeine, and amitriptyline in the victim's remains. Puente had power of attorney, or was the designated payee for most of the victims. Bank records showed she had forged and cashed their checks after they disappeared. The handyman who built the box for Everson Gilmouth was granted immunity from prosecution and testified against her. Puente's trial began on February 9, 1993, in Monterey County. The trial was very long. The prosecution called 156 witnesses and submitted over 3,100 pieces of evidence. The testimony showed a pattern of Puente targeting vulnerable, elderly, or disabled people who received government benefits, drugging them, and taking their money after they died. The jury deliberated for 35 days. On August 26, 1993, they reached a verdict. They found Dorothea Puente guilty of the first-degree murders of Benjamin Fink, Leona Carpenter, and Dorothy Miller. However, the jury could not agree on a verdict for the other 6 murders. They were deadlocked on those counts. Because the jury deadlocked, the judge declared a mistrial for those 6 charges. The next phase was to decide her punishment. The prosecution sought the death penalty. The jury again deadlocked, which meant the death penalty was off the table. On December 10, 1993, the judge sentenced Dorothea Puente to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was sent to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. In prison, Puente maintained her innocence. An appeal in 1997 upheld her convictions. She lived in prison for nearly 18 years. Dorothea Puente died of natural causes at the prison hospital on March 27, 2011, at the age of 82. The victims' families were left to cope with the loss of their loved ones, whose lives had been taken for a few $100s each in monthly benefits. Story 3. Francisco de Assis Pereira was born on November 29, 1967, in Sao Paulo, Brazil. He grew up in a crowded, low-income neighborhood. His family did not have much money. His parents worked hard, but they often struggled to pay for basic needs. The home was tense, and arguments were common. When Francisco was a small child, a terrible thing happened to him. A woman who was his aunt and lived in the home began to sexually abuse him. This abuse happened many times. He was too young to understand it fully or to stop it. After this abuse, his thoughts about women and their bodies became confused and fixated. He developed a specific obsession with women's breasts. As a boy, Francisco was quiet and did not play much with other children. He was often alone. In school, he had trouble focusing. He found the lessons difficult and fell behind. Other students sometimes bullied him because he was different and kept to himself. He did not complete his basic education and left school early. As a teenager, Francisco moved from one simple job to another. He worked as a helper in shops and warehouses. He was not a good worker. He often arrived late or did not follow instructions. He would get frustrated easily and then quit or be fired. Because of this, he never learned a proper skill or trade. He had no career path. In his early adult life, Francisco's relationships were strange and harmful. One of his bosses, a man, pressured him into having sexual relations. Francisco felt he could not say no because this man was his employer. This experience made him feel powerless and confused about his own sexuality. Later, Francisco lived with a transgender woman named Thana for over a year. Their relationship was not peaceful. During one argument, Francisco became very angry. He punched Thana hard in the stomach. He also slapped her across the face. This showed he could be violent with people close to him. Another relationship caused him physical injury. He was with a man who had a goth style. During a sexual act, this man was very rough. He injured Francisco's penis badly. It almost tore. This injury caused Francisco lasting pain. For a long time after, he felt pain during any sexual activity. He also developed a deep fear of losing his reproductive organs completely. Because of his lack of education and poor work history, Francisco could only find unstable jobs. Eventually, he found work as a motorcycle courier. He would deliver packages and documents across the city. This job suited him because he worked alone. He did not have to talk to co-workers or a boss all day. He rode his motorcycle through the streets of Sao Paulo, anonymous in the busy city. In his personal life, he remained alone. He did not have friends. His family was no longer in contact with him. He spent most of his time by himself, thinking his own thoughts. He lived in a small, rented room. He did not have hobbies or activities. He simply worked his courier job and then returned to his room. Francisco continued his job as a motorcycle courier. He spent his days riding around Sao Paulo. He began to notice young women at subway stations and bus stops. He watched them closely. He looked for women who seemed sad or upset. He looked for women who were alone and looked down at the ground. He developed a plan to approach these women. He decided to pretend to be a talent scout for a big cosmetics company. He practiced a friendly smile and a calm way of talking. He bought a nicer shirt to look more professional. He would ride his motorcycle to a subway station, like Jabaquara Station, and park it. Then he would walk around and look for a target. His method was always the same. He would walk up to a woman and say hello. He would say he worked for a modeling agency. He would tell the woman she had a perfect look for a new advertising campaign. He said the photo shoot would pay good money and would not take long. He was very convincing because he spoke softly and listened to the women's problems. If a woman said she was in a hurry or had problems at home, he would say the modeling job could help her solve her money troubles. When a woman agreed, he would lead her to his motorcycle. He had an extra helmet. He would tell her the studio was in a quiet place, like the state park forest, for good natural photos. The women, hoping for a better life, would get on the motorcycle behind him. He would drive deep into the forest on park roads. He would stop in a very isolated place, far from people. He would tell the woman this was the location for the photos. Then he would attack her. He would first rape the woman. After the assault, he would kill her. His method for killing was to use a shoelace or a piece of rope he brought. He would strangle the woman from behind until she stopped breathing. His first murder victim was Raquel Mota Rodriguez. She was 23 years old and worked in a furniture store. On January 9, 1998, she was going home from work. Francisco met her at Jabaquara Station. He used his modeling story. Raquel called her cousin and said she had met a man with a job offer. Her cousin warned her it was dangerous. Raquel said she would not go, but she still went with Francisco. He took her to the state forest, assaulted her, and strangled her. Her body was found 1 week later. His next victim was Selma Ferreira Queiroz. She was young and wanted to be an accountant. On July 3rd, she was going to an office in downtown Sao Paulo. Francisco approached her. He used the same story. Selma went with him. After he killed her, he did something new. He found her sister's phone number in Selma's things. He called the sister. He lied and said Selma was kidnapped. He asked for money to release her. He said he would call back, but he never did. Selma's body was found the next day. His next victim was Patricia Goncalves Marinho. She was 24 years old and lived with her grandmother. On April 17th, she left home and disappeared. Francisco had approached her with the modeling story. He took her to the state park, assaulted her, and strangled her. Her body was found much later, on July 28th. The police could only identify her by her clothes and jewelry. His final victim was Elisangela Francisco da Silva. She was 21 and had come to Sao Paulo for a better life. On a day in late July, a friend left her at a shopping mall. Francisco found her there. He told her his modeling story. Elisangela went with him. He took her to the state park, assaulted her, and strangled her. Her body was found on July 28th, near where Patricia's body was found. During this time, Francisco kept going to his courier job. He acted normally at work. No one there knew what he was doing. But after killing Elisangela, he started to feel nervous. He thought the police might be getting closer. He also made a big mistake. One day, he approached a woman and had a strange, nervous episode. The woman said she could not go with him at that moment. Francisco, wanting her to contact him later, gave her a business card. This card had a fake name, Jean, but it also had the real phone number for his courier company on it. The woman felt this was very strange. She kept the card. The woman who received the business card from the nervous man thought his behavior was suspicious. She reported the incident to the police department that handled homicides, known as the DHPP. She gave them the card with the name Jean and the phone number for the courier company. The police called the phone number. The owner of the courier company answered. The police asked about an employee named Jean. The owner said there was no Jean working there. But the owner remembered something important. He told the police that one of his couriers, Francisco, had acted strangely recently. Then, just a few days earlier, Francisco had suddenly quit his job. He left a note on the table saying his journey there had ended. Next to the note, he had left a newspaper that had a police sketch of a suspected serial killer. The sketch looked like Francisco. The police now had a strong suspect. They showed photographs of Francisco to the woman who reported the card. She confirmed he was the man who approached her. The police then got Francisco's full name and details from his old job. They learned he was from Sao Paulo, but had family connections in Rio Grande do Sul, a state far to the south. They believed he might have fled there. The police began a large search for Francisco. They showed his picture on television news programs, asking for the public's help. A man named João Carlos Villaverde, a fisherman in the town of Itaqui in Rio Grande do Sul, saw the broadcast. Francisco was staying with him. João Carlos realized his guest was the wanted man. He contacted the local police immediately. On August 4th, 1998, the police went to the fisherman's house. They arrested Francisco de Assis Pereira without a fight. He was taken to a police station for questioning. During the interrogation, Francisco confessed to the 4 murders. He explained how he pretended to be a modeling scout, lured the women to the forest, assaulted them, and strangled them. He also showed the police where he had left the bones of Selma Ferreira Queiroz, which had not been found yet. The case went to trial. Francisco was charged with multiple crimes, including rape, murder, and fraud for the fake kidnapping call. In court, he said he felt possessed by an evil force. He claimed he had a good and a bad personality, and sometimes could not control the dark side. He said he wished the women had run away from him. He also told the court that if he had not been caught, he planned to start eating parts of his victims' bodies. The judge found him guilty of all charges. Because Brazilian law had a maximum prison limit at the time, he was sentenced to a total of 268 years in prison, but he would only serve a maximum of 30 years. He was sent to a high-security prison called the Taubaté House of Custody and Psychiatric Treatment. While in prison, Francisco received many letters from women who admired him. He married one of these admirers, a woman named Jessera, who had a university degree. They married inside the prison, but later separated. On December 18, 2000, other prisoners tried to kill Francisco during a riot. They blamed him for bringing negative attention to the prison. 4 inmates were killed in the fight, but Francisco survived. He was then moved to a different, more isolated psychiatric prison facility. Psychiatrists who examined him stated that his mind was deeply disturbed and that his condition could not be cured. They warned that if he was ever released, he would likely commit violent crimes again. According to the sentence, he will complete his 30-year term and be eligible for release in 2028. The man who tricked women with promises of a better life will spend the rest of his own life behind bars. Story 4. Mikhail Viktorovich Popkov was born on March 7, 1964, in the city of Norilsk. Norilsk is a very cold industrial city in the northern part of Russia. Soon after his birth, his parents decided to move. They moved to a different city called Angarsk, located in the Irkutsk region of Siberia. Angarsk is also an industrial city, full of factories and chemical plants. Mikhail Popkov grew up there. His family was an ordinary working-class family. His father worked in one of the local factories. His mother also worked. There were no reports of him having any brothers or sisters. He was their only child. The family lived in a standard Soviet-era apartment building, like most people in the city at that time. His childhood was not unusual in any obvious way from the outside. He went to the local schools in Angarsk. He was an average student. He did not stand out as being particularly clever or particularly troubled in his early school years. He finished his basic education, and then, like many young men at the time, he had to serve in the Soviet army. This military service was compulsory. He completed his service without any notable problems. After finishing his army duty, he returned to Angarsk. He needed to find a job. He decided to join the police force. He became a police officer for the Angarsk City Police Department. This was a respected job. It provided a stable income and a certain level of authority in the community. He worked as a patrol officer. His job was to drive around the city, respond to calls, and keep order. During this time, he met a woman named Elena. They started a relationship. After some time, they got married. Their marriage was seen as normal by friends and family. They had a daughter together. They named their daughter Ekaterina. To everyone around them, they appeared to be a standard family. Mikhail Popkov was a father, a husband, and a police officer. He worked for the police force for about 10 years. Then, in the early 1990s, he left the police department. The exact reasons for his leaving are not fully clear from public records. After leaving the police, he took jobs as a security guard. He worked as a security guard at a large oil and chemical company in Angarsk. Later, he also worked for a private security firm. His life seemed settled. In his personal life, he was known to be a quiet man. He did not have many close friends. He spent most of his time outside of work with his family. He was handy with tools and could fix things around the house and on his car. He owned a car, a Russian-made Lada Niva. This is a type of car that is like a small Jeep. It can drive on rough roads. There were some aspects of his behavior that those close to him noticed. He held very strict views about how women should behave. He believed women should be modest and stay at home. He did not like women who he thought were not following these rules. He sometimes expressed anger about women who drank alcohol or went out at night without a man. He was also very suspicious of his wife, Elena. He often accused her of being unfaithful to him, even though she denied it and there was no evidence for it. These were private tensions within his home. His daily routine was simple. He worked his shifts as a security guard. He came home. He spent time with his daughter. He argued with his wife about her supposed infidelity. He drove his Lada Niva. This was his life as the year 1992 began. In 1992, Mikhail Popkov began to act on his anger towards women. He used his knowledge from his time as a police officer. He still owned his police uniform. He also owned his personal car, the Lada Niva. This car was similar to the ones used by the police. He planned a method to find victims. His plan was simple. He would drive around the city of Angarsk at night, especially on Tuesday nights. He often wore parts of his old police uniform. He looked for women who were walking alone, often late at night. Some of these women were coming home from work. Some were coming from parties. Some were sex workers. He would drive up to them in his car. He would use his authority from his uniform to seem trustworthy. He would offer them a ride home, pretending it was a police service for their safety. The women, seeing a man in a police car, often felt safe and accepted the ride. Once the woman was inside his car, he did not drive her home. Instead, he drove to the edge of the city. He drove to remote forest areas or lonely industrial zones. These were places he knew well from his police patrols. When the car stopped in a secluded place, his behavior would change. He would become violent. He would force the woman to get out of the car. He would then attack her. He always had tools in his car. He used weapons like knives, axes, screwdrivers, and sometimes a metal bar. He attacked his victims with these weapons. He killed them. The attacks were very brutal. After the women were dead, he would then sexually assault their bodies. He would also use the weapons to mutilate the bodies. He did this to hide evidence, and because of his own violent feelings. He would then leave the body in the woods or near a roadside. After each crime, he would go home. He would clean himself and his car very carefully. He used his police training to avoid leaving evidence. He acted normal at home with his family. He went to work the next day. No one suspected him. He did not stop. He repeated this process many times. He mostly did this in Angarsk, but sometimes he drove to other towns in the Irkutsk region. He usually committed the crimes on Tuesday nights into early Wednesday mornings. Because of this, bodies were often found on Wednesdays. People later called him the Wednesday Murderer. His victims were all women. Their ages were from as young as 19 to as old as 50. Most were strangers to him. He later said he wanted to cleanse the city of women he considered immoral. He said a woman walking alone at night was asking for punishment. His anger at his wife, who he wrongly thought was unfaithful, fueled his violence towards these other women. In 1998, he committed a different kind of murder. He killed a male police officer. The officer was off duty and was with a female friend. Popkov attacked them both. The woman survived, but the police officer died. Popkov did this because he feared the officer might recognize him. The crimes created fear in the region for years. Police investigators did find some clues. They noticed that tire tracks from a Lada Niva, a 4x4 vehicle, were found near many crime scenes. They knew the killer might have a police background because of the way he approached victims and avoided evidence. They interviewed thousands of men. They even spoke to Popkov at one point, but he was calm and convincing. As a former police officer, he knew how to act during an interview. He was not suspected at that time. The investigations continued, but the killer was not caught. Popkov kept killing for many years, stopping for periods, and then starting again. The long investigation into the murders in the Angarsk area changed in 2012. Police investigators had a key piece of evidence from many old crime scenes, a DNA sample from the killer. They had found this biological evidence on the victims, but for years they had no match in their databases. The police then had a new idea. They knew the killer likely had a connection to law enforcement because of the car tracks and his behavior. They decided to collect DNA samples from every current and former police officer in the Irkutsk region. This was a very large task. They collected DNA from about 3,500 men who were or had been policemen. They compared these samples to the DNA from the crimes. In 2012, they found a match. The DNA belonged to Mikhail Popkov, a former police officer. He was now working as a security guard. The police moved quickly to arrest him. They arrested Popkov at his home in Angarsk. He did not fight the arrest. After his arrest, the police began to question him. At first, he denied everything. But when the police showed him the DNA evidence, he began to confess. He started to tell the police about his crimes. He remembered many details. He confessed to murdering many women over the years. The police took him to the different crime scenes. He showed them where he had left the bodies. He explained his methods. His confessions helped police solve dozens of old, unsolved murders. In January 2015, Mikhail Popkov went to trial for the first time. The trial was in a court in Irkutsk. The prosecution presented evidence for 22 murders and 2 attempted murders. The evidence included the DNA match, his own confessions, and the testimony of the two women who survived his attacks. The court found him guilty of all these charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. He was sent to a strict, closed prison colony. However, the case did not end there. After being in prison for 2 years, Popkov started confessing to more murders. He said he had killed many more women than the 22 he was convicted for. He met with investigators and gave them details of 59 additional killings. The police had to check his new confessions. They matched his details to unsolved cases where bodies had been found. They found that his information was correct for most of these cases. A new trial began in 2018 for these additional crimes. This trial lasted for many months. The court examined evidence for 59 more murders. In December 2018, the judge announced the verdict. The court found Popkov guilty of 56 of the 59 additional murders. For 3 of the killings, there was not enough physical evidence to prove his guilt, so he was not convicted for those. The judge gave him a second life sentence, to be served after his first life sentence. Even later, Popkov confessed to more killings. In 2020, he confessed to 2 more murders. In 2021, a court found him guilty of those 2 killings and gave him an additional 9 years and 8 months in prison. In November 2023, he was found guilty of 3 more murders and sentenced to another 10 years in prison. The total number of murders he has been convicted for is 83. He has confessed to even more, but not all have been proven in court. The victims' families attended the trials. They finally learned what had happened to their daughters, wives, and sisters. Many expressed anger and relief that the killer was caught. There was no death penalty in Russia at that time, so life in prison was the strongest possible punishment. Mikhail Popkov remains in a Russian prison for the rest of his life, where he will die. Story 5. Ursabet Bathory was born on August 7, 1560. She was born on a family estate in a place called Nyírbátor in the Kingdom of Hungary. This area is part of modern-day Slovakia. From the moment she was born, she had a very high social position. This was because she was a member of the Bathory family. The Bathory family was one of the most powerful and wealthy noble families in the region. She spent her childhood at Aix Castle, another family property. Her father was Baron George VI Bathory. Her mother was Baroness Anna Bathory. Her mother was from another important branch of the same family. This meant her parents were distant relatives. Marriages within noble families were common at the time. They were used to keep land and power within a small group. Ursabet received an education that was very good for a girl of her time, especially because she was from a rich family. She learned to read and write. She was taught several languages. She learned Latin, German, Hungarian, and Greek. Her family was Protestant, specifically Calvinist, and she was raised in this religion. As a child, Ursabet suffered from seizures. Modern historians believe these might have been caused by a condition called epilepsy. During that time, people did not understand epilepsy well. They called it falling sickness. The treatments were often strange and unscientific. Some treatments involved using the blood of a healthy person. When Ursabet was only 13 years old, something happened that was talked about later. There was a rumor that she became pregnant. The rumor said the father was a peasant boy. The story said the Bathory family gave the baby to a trusted local woman. The woman was paid money. The baby was then taken far away to a place called Wallachia. This story came from rumors told by peasants long after the event. Historians are not sure if this story is true. In 1574, when Ursabet was 14, her family arranged for her to be engaged. This was a normal practice for noble families. Her engagement was a political arrangement. It was meant to join 2 powerful families together. She was engaged to a man named Count Ferenc Nadasdy. The wedding happened the next year, in May 1575, when Ursebet was 15 years old. The wedding was held at a palace in Verano. Her new husband, Ferenc Nadasdy, gave her a wedding gift. The gift was his household at Szeged Castle. This castle was located in the Little Carpathian Mountains. The castle was not fully theirs yet, but Ursebet would manage it. After the marriage, the couple lived mostly at the Nadasdy family castle in Sarver. The marriage joined their lands. This made the couple very rich and powerful, with land in both Transylvania and the Kingdom of Hungary. Ferenc Nadasdy was often away. He was a soldier and a military commander. He led Hungarian troops in wars against the Ottoman Empire. While her husband was away at war for long periods, Ursebet was in charge. She managed all their business affairs and their many estates. This was a big responsibility for a young woman. Her job included taking care of the people living on their land. She was supposed to provide medical care and organize defenses against possible enemy attacks. Ursebet and Ferenc had children. Their known children were Anna, Orshaya, Catalin, Andras, and Pal. As was customary in noble families, the children were cared for by governesses. The mother was not directly involved in their day-to-day care. The children were raised by hired staff. In 1604, after 29 years of marriage, Ferenc Nadasdy died. He had been ill for several years. Before he died, he made arrangements. He asked a man named Georgi Thurzo, who was the Palatine of Hungary, to look after his family. He entrusted his widow and children to Thurzo's care. After her husband's death, Ursebet Bathory was a very rich and independent widow. She controlled vast lands and several castles, including Szeged Castle. After the death of her husband, Ursebet Bathory had complete control over her castles and lands. She was one of the most powerful individuals in the region. It was during this time, in the late 1590s and early 1600s, that the crimes began. The victims were young women and girls, most of whom were servants or peasants from the villages near her castles. The crimes typically started when a girl was brought to work at one of her castles, like Szeged or Sarver. Sometimes, girls were sent by their families hoping to learn skills from a noble household. Other times, they were simply hired as maids. Once inside the castle, they became trapped. Ursebet Bathory, often helped by a small group of her most trusted servants, began to torture them. The methods of torture were cruel and varied. She would beat the girls with heavy sticks or whips. She used hot irons to burn their skin. She would stab them with needles, often under their fingernails or in their lips. In the winter, she would force girls to stand naked outside in the cold and then throw cold water on them until they froze to death. Some testimonies later stated she used scissors to cut off fingers. She sometimes cut pieces of flesh from their bodies. The reasons for these attacks were often minor. A girl might be punished for making a small mistake in her sewing work. She might be attacked for speaking too loudly or for being too sad. The torture seemed to be a way for Bathory to express anger and exercise total power over the helpless. Her trusted servants helped her. These servants included a woman named Durat Yesenes, another named Alona Joe, a woman named Katerina Benica, and a man named Janos Shigeri. Their jobs were to bring the girls to Bathory, to restrain them during the torture, and to dispose of the bodies afterward. They were loyal to their mistress and followed her orders. For many years, the victims were peasant girls from poor families. Their disappearances were often not investigated seriously. A noble woman punishing her servants was not unusual, and their families had little power to complain. However, the crimes escalated. In 1609, Bathory started a new venture. She opened a kind of school for young noble women at her castle. This school was called a gymnasium. Families from the lower nobility sent their daughters there to learn manners and social skills, hoping to improve their future prospects. This provided Bathory with a new type of victim. Now, the girls coming to her castle were from noble families, not poor peasant families. They began to disappear too. At first, Bathory gave excuses. She told parents their daughters had run away or had gone to work elsewhere. But as more daughters failed to return home, their families became suspicious and angry. Parents started to talk to each other and compare stories. They began to send complaints to the authorities. A Lutheran minister named Istvan Magyari heard these rumors and started to make public complaints about the Countess. He spoke about her crimes at court in Vienna. The rumors grew too loud to ignore. In 1610, King Matthias II ordered an investigation. He put the country's highest judge, Palatine Georgi Thurzo, in charge. Thurzo was the same man Bathory's late husband had asked to protect his family. Thurzo ordered 2 notaries, men named Andras Korestri and Moses Ziricki, to collect evidence. They traveled around and interviewed witnesses from March to October of 1610. They gathered over 300 statements. The witnesses were people from nearby villages, former castle staff, and the families of missing girls. They told consistent stories. A man named Thomas, a town official, testified about seeing a girl with terrible wounds on her hand and arm. The girl said the Lady Widow Nadesty had done it. Another witness, a noblewoman named Anna, said she sent her daughter to the school and her daughter never returned. She stated she knew her daughter had been tortured to death. The most serious testimonies came from the noble families. Their social status meant their complaints had to be taken seriously. Their missing daughters could not be explained away as runaway servants. The evidence pointed to murder. Based on this evidence, Georgi Thurzo decided to act. On December 29, 1610, he arrived at Szeged Castle with soldiers. He did not announce his visit beforehand. He found Bathory and her servants. According to Thurzo's own later letter, his men found one girl already dead and another girl who was injured but still alive. The living girl was freed. Bathory and 4 of her servants were arrested on the spot. Following the arrest at Szeged Castle, the legal process began. There were 2 main trials. The first trial was not for Erzsébet Bathory herself, but for her 4 arrested servants, Dorottya Senes, Ilona Joe, Katerina Banicka, and János Sigeri. This trial was held on January 2nd and 7th, 1611. The servants were questioned. At that time, it was legal to use torture to get a confession from suspects. The servants were tortured before and during the trial. Under torture, the servants confessed to helping Bathory. They said they had acted on her direct orders. They described how they had captured girls, held them down during torture, and helped hide the bodies. They also gave numbers of victims, though these numbers did not match each other and were given under extreme pain. One servant mentioned a book that supposedly listed 650 victims, but this book was never found. Because of their confessions and the witness statements collected earlier, the servants were found guilty of being accomplices to murder. The court decided on their punishments. Dorottya Senes and Ilona Joe were sentenced to death. Their fingers were torn out with hot pincers, and then they were burned alive. János Sigeri, because he was seen as less responsible, was beheaded, and then his body was burned. Katerina Banicka was found to have been forced to participate, so she received a life sentence in prison. Another servant, Urtsi Majorova, who was captured later, was also burned alive. The big question was what to do with Erzsébet Bathory. A public trial for a noble woman of her status was a complex political problem. Her family was still extremely powerful. Her son, Paul Nadesty, and her sons-in-law, like Nikola Zrinski, were important figures. They worried that a public trial and execution would bring permanent shame to the family and cause them to lose all of Bathory's valuable lands and property to the crown. King Matthias, too, wanted a death sentence. He also owed Bathory a large amount of money. If she were convicted and executed, her property would go to the crown and his debt would be cancelled. He sent angry letters to Georgi Thurzo, demanding that Bathory be brought to a public trial. However, Thurzo, along with Bathory's family, made a different plan. They argued that a public trial would disgrace the entire Hungarian nobility. Instead, they decided she should be hidden away forever. Thurzo never brought Bathory to a formal public trial. There was no legal verdict declared against her by a court. Instead, she was sentenced by a private agreement between Thurzo and her family. She was imprisoned for life within her own castle, Szeged. She was placed under house arrest. She was not thrown into a dungeon. She could move through certain rooms of the castle, but she could not leave. Windows were bricked up to prevent escape or communication. Guards watched her at all times. This arrangement served the purposes of her family and Thurzo. It removed her from society and prevented more killings without causing a public scandal. Erzsébet Bathory lived like this for almost 4 years. On the night of August 20th, 1614, she complained to a guard that her hands were cold. She then went to bed. She was found dead the next morning. She was 54 years old. She was buried quickly in the church of Szeged. Later, because of local protests, her body was likely moved to the Bathory family crypt at Ext. The exact location of her grave is not known today. After her death, the story did not end. Over the following decades, legends grew. Writers began to add sensational details that were not in the original witness statements. The most famous legend said she bathed in the blood of virgins to stay young. This story first appeared in print nearly 100 years after her death. Modern historians agree this was a later myth, not a fact from the investigation. The true number of her victims is still debated by historians. The court testimonies mention many deaths, but the exact count is impossible to know. Some historians believe the charges were exaggerated by her political enemies to seize her wealth. Others point to the large body of witness statements as evidence of real and terrible crimes. Regardless of the exact number, the documented evidence from 1610 describes a long pattern of brutal torture and murder committed by a powerful woman who believed she could act without consequence. The story of the Blood Countess remains a dark chapter in history, a mix of confirmed cruelty, political intrigue, and later legend.